for the third time. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Abigail Murray. I work for the Saldanha Bay IDZ, the Industrial Development Zone Licensing Company, and I'm responsible for enterprise development. A special word of welcome this morning to the Mayor of the Saldanha Bay Municipality, our CEO at the back, the Business Forum, the Community Skills and Training Committee, Transnet, the Saldanha Bay Municipality, small businesses in our midst, and also individuals from the community interested to hear about this industry of ours. Introducing the Togasi talks. In-house, we said we need to explain what does Togasi mean. It literally just means talks on the oil and gas services industry. We plan to have 7 sessions like this one. And I will elaborate later on, what we plan to cover in the 7 series of workshops. So it's not the same one, it will be different sessions. I think Benny will also talk on that later on. The role of enterprise development. And I think I left out the mission of the Saldanha Bay IDZ includes job creation and economic development. And the role of enterprise development in this bigger picture is to develop small businesses for the maximum uptake of opportunities from this industry. And then this morning we thought we'd just mention the team that is here today. I already mentioned Doug Southgate as our CEO. Patrick Lakabane is our skills associate. And very busy at the registration table is our marketing team. I just wanted to acknowledge them because the invitations that you got was from our marketing team, Senzwa and Marushka. And Benny I will talk to you about shortly. I worked for the West Coast Business Development Center for quite some time, doing enterprise development. And this job, I quite understand enterprise development, but some of the questions that I had was, what is oil and gas? What does it mean to this area? Why does one rig look different to another rig? What do people do with rigs? Why is it important for this economy? And how will locals benefit from that? Why not? What kind of skills and jobs can we provide in this industry? And obviously, what can we not provide? And how do we bridge that? And then I wasn't working at the IDZ very long when I had a meeting with my immediate superior, Laura Painke, who does business development. And we had this meeting with this small black girl, and until she started talking. And she spoke about this industry that she's worked in and mentioned Brazil and Nigeria and Angola. And I thought, how old is this girl? And then after that meeting, she literally spoke about the globe as if it was Saldanha Bay with our 4 streets and our 3 shops. And I thought to myself, I asked Laura, who is this girl? And then Laura said, now she works for Maersk. After the meeting, both Laura and I went to our CEO and said, we just need this girl. Because, like I said, I also wanted to understand this industry. What does it mean? How the streams affect where they go to different countries and all of these things. So I was just so impressed. And we went to our CEO and he said, Saldanha needs this person because we need to hear more about this industry. And in the job, obviously, I learned that our community also needs this information. And we need to learn what it is that we will prepare for. What it is that we need to go tell our children, what do they need to prepare for. And how we go about that, really. So that is how I met Benedicta. Benedicta worked in the oil and gas industry for 7 years. I think she will talk about that as she continues with the presentation. The plan for these sessions is not to hold you very long. We thought about an hour max. And obviously we'll communicate further the dates that we intend. In terms of questions, I think Benny will also just explain that. We thought we won't have a question and answer session. We plan to send out a survey where you will then submit your questions, and at our next session, because we would like everyone to attend all of the sessions, because the one flows into the other one basically, and then we'll address the questions as we go on. So the objective for today is literally for myself and all of you here to learn about this industry, but more importantly to inspire you into development for this industry so that we are more ready than what we are today. So without anything further, I'd like to introduce Benedicta Mahlangu. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Abigail, for that wonderful introduction. It always sounds different when someone else speaks about you, that you think, oh, is that me that you're talking about? I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to come this morning very early, and especially for the active response to our invitation sent out to participate in these Togasi series. As Abigail has mentioned, instead of doing one complete, say, full-day workshop with regards to what the oil and gas industry entails and ultimately how the local business community and as a business community and community members as a whole can participate in the industry, we thought we'd break it up into smaller, sizable chunks, 1 hour, once a month, every second Thursday, in order to allow the information to actually really set in. Because as you will see, some of it is very technical, and some of it does require, especially businesses, to go back home and think of how can you then look into your existing businesses or what you are aspiring to do in order to become a better role player into what we're trying to establish as the Saldanha Bay IDZ. And with that, we start off today with an introduction to the oil and gas, looking at what is the oil and gas industry, very high level overview, moving from the formation, which is the fossil fuels, all the way through to the end product, which would be your petrol in your cars, the plastic bottles, and some of the petrochemical industry outputs, as well as differentiating, because when we speak, our logo does say we're servicing the upstream oil and gas industry. And I just would like to define what upstream is versus midstream and downstream, because South Africa is actually not a very active player in the upstream as it is in the downstream, which is the more refinery and end product of the distribution. And then just to run through what all of them will entail so you have the holistic view. The next month, so that will be in June, we'd go into the next topic of delving into the components of the offshore industry. So what are the various equipments, such as the rigs, your supply vessels, your marine patrol, and the different types of rigs? I would go into more details of what each one does, its functionality, so that you can kind of be able to understand as it comes into the port and be able to even identify yourselves. Then we'll look at oil rig jobs. Not to be confused with the jobs that will be found within the Saldanha Bay IDZ zone, but more this is more to, again, in the sense of giving the holistic picture of what does one do when they say they're working offshore. And in this one, actually, it very much is personal anecdotes. I would share some of the stories of my experiences when I worked offshore, and as well as explain just what, very briefly the categories are entailing. And the other key thing to also draw from that is we want to highlight why we stress the skills training and development to the community, because of the specialization that is required to work with these equipment and almost how it matches up to the kind of jobs that also take place offshore. And then life, there also is a lot of fun to be had while you are out in the middle of the ocean. And also with that, I will just go into explaining what life is like offshore. And the idea also with that is to give a better understanding of when we have rigs that come for repair. Some of them still have the crews on board, and they are looking to enjoy being in Saldanha Bay, even though there is the work component to be had. And that's why even in the business forum, there is, for example, the Saldanha Bay Tourism Association involved in there, because it can also extend to more than just the core business, but also the livelihood and the lifestyle that we offer to the crews and personnel that come into our area. Then the talks almost start to take a focus, because right now it's very generic, looking at the industry as it stands, and then we start veering almost into what the Saldanha Bay IDZ specifically would be playing into, because we would be supporting the industry offshore through maintenance, repair and fabrication work. So I would go into the various kinds of work that takes place in a zone such as the Saldanha Bay IDZ, comparisons to what happens in global centers as well, to give just a feel of what to expect to come for those who may still not fully understand how they can be active players in this IDZ. One that's also of a particular interest, especially to business people, which is the larger audience that we have this morning, is the supply value chain, which to have a look at what is required to make this engine work in essence. From our perspective, what can be sourced locally, what must be sourced internationally, how we can close gaps with regards to any sort of offerings that the industry requires that perhaps the Saldanha Bay business community may not as yet be able to come into play. And then that way we've got the time to close those gaps. And then we would close off, that would be around November. So I do hope to still see the same faces come November. Then it would really be that summarizing the sessions and looking into what has been learned, how the community views these sessions and their role as a result within the Saldanha Bay IDZ, and really just trying to find a way in which we can collaboratively all work together to make this a great success. Before I go on, Abby has already alluded to a little bit of some of my background, but I thought I would just give a personal mini biography of what qualifies me to stand here before you this morning. I'm born and raised in Durban, and you know, it's a coastal town, so I do have a natural flair for seaborne trades, which, you know, can be lumped into marine, into maritime, and then obviously with my experience it became also oil and gas. So that's also the other reason that has kept me going in the industry, and which is why I'm really looking forward to being able to share this knowledge, is I do find the seaborne trades or the marine, maritime and oil and gas industry very fascinating. My background is in chemical engineering, so I moved actually to Cape Town to start off my degree, and in my second year I received a scholarship to go to Germany to do part of my studies. And the reason I mention that is this opened up my eyes, and suddenly I realized that I do not only have to limit myself to the mining sector or just the petroleum, which is the refinery industry, or some of the other smaller companies that do take up the chemical engineering graduates, but I knew there was a whole big world out there of so much else that one can do with any actually engineering degree, but more specifically a chemical engineering degree. And the reason I also find this quite a strong motivator is that through these talks, that is exactly what we're trying to also achieve, is that sometimes the view is only limited because that's all that we're exposed to and know. And all it takes is perhaps just someone else just giving you a different perspective or a different outlook into a broader spectrum, and with that your mind starts to think of the bigger possibilities. And this subsequently led to my actually being hired by Schlumberger, which is one of the ranked #1 oil and gas services industry company, to do work for them offshore in exploration. I did live at sea, so I worked rotations, which are 5 weeks on, 5 weeks off. Lots of travel. I was very fortunate to be involved in projects, I would say, in almost all the producing areas, which is the Gulf of Mexico, the North Sea, west coast of Africa, and west of Australia. So this then also gives me a very real understanding of the conditions in which the rigs that we will be servicing in the Saldanha Bay IDZ, what kind of sea conditions they're working in, and therefore the sensitivities around the work mission that must take place, or the sensitivity around moving crews between one job in one part of the world to the other, the importance of meeting the deadlines when those rigs must be out of the zone. That's all, I have a very real sense of what that means. From Schlumberger, so when Abby met me, actually I had put down my safety boots and hard hat cap and hung up my coat, or at least I thought, and had returned to South Africa and joined the company Maersk Shipping, which is also known to be the industry role player with regards to the shipping. So I now got exposed to port activities in the sense of freight movement. So I got to get a bit of a different view in how trades work. And the combination, therefore, of my oil and gas offshore experience and working with marine operations within Maersk has led to my being the person who heads up the ease of doing business portfolio within the Saldanha Bay IDZ. And this portfolio basically is to design and implement a model that allows our investors and business owners who operate within the zone to really, in essence, be able to focus on their core business and not have to hassle about the other peripheral things with permits and if they have visa issues, processes of how to get their rigs in and out. So it's looking at a model that allows really, in essence, seamless flow of someone coming to do the work that they need to do, finding the parts, finding the workmanship, and being able to really get out in the time that has been designated in order to meet their further obligations in their job. That's enough about me. We now get on to real business, which is what is oil and gas. I just would like to get a show of hands just to be able to gauge the audience that we have here today. How many people do know about the oil and gas industry? I'm talking with regards to formation or like rig work, in terms of a technical sense, if perhaps can move on to quite a few, but okay, then I'm in the right place. How I've structured these is I put videos in, very short animated movies. Reason being, it's much easier to get the visual of what it is that happens sub-level with regards to the oil and gas drilling and exploration. So without further ado, I'll start off with the first video and then I'll talk more into it after that.
Geologists and geophysicists have agreed on the existence of a prospect, a potential field. In order to find out if hydrocarbons are indeed trapped in the reservoir rock, we must drill to hit them. Bearing in mind the knowledge acquired about the substratum and the topography of the land, the best position for the installation of the drilling equipment is determined. Generally, it is vertically above the point of maximum thickness of the geological layer suspected of containing hydrocarbons. The drillers then make a hole in conditions that are sometimes difficult. Of small diameter, from 20 to 50 centimeters, this hole will generally go down to a depth of between 2,000 and 4,000 meters. Exceptionally, certain wells exceed 6,000 meters. One of them has even exceeded 11,000 meters. Certain fields can be buried at a depth equivalent to the height of 12 Eiffel Towers. The derrick is the visible part of the drilling rig. It's a metal tower several tens of meters high. It's used to vertically introduce the drill strings down the hole. These drill strings are made up of metallic tubes screwed end to end.
That's just going through the various parts of the main frame structure that you would see, what we call topside of a rig. And this, although this is more of an onshore rig platform, it does give you the main components of what comprises of the rig, which is the derrick, the drilling mud, and the pump that must be part of that structure and setup. And these presentations will be sent to you afterwards, also for your perusal.
They transmit a rotating movement, rotary drilling, to the drilling tool, the drill bit, and help circulate a liquid called mud, because of its appearance, down to the bottom of the well. The drilling rig works like an enormous electric hand drill, of which the derrick would be the body, the drill strings, the drive, and the drilling tool, the drill bit.
So when you see the different types of rigs, no matter what the structure component is, all the action actually happens around this central portion, which is the derrick and has the drill bit that's going down into the ground.
The most usual tool is an assembly of 3 cones, from which comes the name tricone, in very hard steel, which crushes the rock. Sometimes, when the rock being drilled is very resistant, a single block tool encrusted with diamonds is used. This wears down the rock by abrasion. Through the drill pipes, at the extremity of which the drill bit rotates, a special mud is injected, which the mud engineer prepares and controls. This mud cools the drill bit and consolidates the sides of the borehole. Moreover, it avoids a gushing of oil, gas or water from the layer being drilled by equilibrating the pressure. Finally, the mud cleans the bottom of the well. As it makes its way along the pipes, it carries the rock fragments, cuttings, to the surface. The geologist examines these cuttings to discover the characteristics of the rocks being drilled and to detect eventual shows of hydrocarbons. The cuttings, fragments of rock crushed by the drill bit, are brought back up to the surface by the mud. To obtain information on the characteristics of the rock being drilled, a core sample is taken.
And with each of these components within the drilling, this can last years in between. It's a very long process of testing and verifying and making absolutely certain you will produce actual crude oil that is
The drill
usable.
bit is replaced by a hollow tool called a core sampler, which extracts a cylindrical sample of several meters of rock. This core supplies data on the nature of the rock, the inclination of the layers, the structure, permeability, porosity, fluid content, and the fossils present. After having drilled a few hundred meters, the explorers and drillers undertake measurements called loggings down the hole by lowering electronic tools into the well to measure the physical parameters of the rock being drilled.
I like to mention this. When you see the drilling pipe, there's very highly sensitive electronics and computer systems internal of this, and this is very important to know when handling these as we start to have them coming through the IDZs in the terminal.
These measures validate or invalidate or make more precise the hypotheses put forward earlier about the rocks and the fluids that they contain. The log engineer is responsible for the analysis of the results of the various loggings. The sides of the well are then reinforced by steel tubes screwed end to end. These tubes, called casings, are cemented into the ground. They isolate the various layers encountered. When hydrocarbons are found, and if the pressure is sufficient to allow them to come to the surface naturally, the drillers do a flow check. The oil is allowed to come to the surface during several hours or several days through a calibrated hole.
You will see as I go through my presentation, crude oil is based around pressure and temperature.
The quantity recovered is measured, as are the changes in pressure at the bottom of the well. In this way, a little more knowledge is gained about the probable productivity of the field. If the field seems promising, the exploration team ends the first discovery well and goes on to drill a second, even several others, several hundred or 1,000 meters further away. In this way, the exploration team is able to refine its knowledge about the characteristics of the field. The decision to stop drilling is made only when all these appraisal wells have provided sufficient information either to give up the exploration or to envisage future production.
I wanted to use as an introduction for more of a schematic, and there is a lot of terminology involved with regards to the process that takes place, but the key thing to know is that it's a very long process timeline-wise, and there's a lot of specialists involved, from geologists, geophysicists, to drilling engineers, your well services specialists, people who only just look at the core samples and analyze that for some time to determine all the various properties that are required, necessary to deem that particular reservoir or well able to produce enough crude oil for it to be marketable. I try to give a very simplified version of how crude oil is formed, and in essence, it is tiny plants, algae, and bacteria that died millions of years ago. They happen to just slowly deposit to the bottom of the ocean floor, which is the seabed, so known as fossils, and they laid there. And because at the core of the Earth's crust there is no oxygen, the combination of these deposited fuels with the lack of oxygen actually forms a compound called kerogen. The kerogen, with the increasing temperature and pressure, because you can imagine there's more layers depositing, so the pressure builds up, the temperature also increases because the core of the Earth is a very hot mantle. The combination of this is actually what forms crude oil. It's a very simplistic, in inverted commas, way of actually forming something that has so many more powerful uses in its end product. And then with even higher temperature and pressure, it becomes natural gas, which, we know anything that would be vaporized turns into a gaseous phase because of the raised temperature or raising the pressure. So that's what I mean by most of this is centered around the pressure, almost playing around with the pressure and temperature. And also what constitutes a crude oil is hydrogen atoms, carbon atoms, and other traces of some other substances. One of them to note being sulfur. So how they term the crude oil is when it's got a high level content of sulfur, it's known as sour crude oil. And if it's got a lower sulfur content, it's known as sweet crude oil. And if it's got more of because the carbons in the way that the chemistry is formed is just chains joined together with the hydrogen atoms around it. The ones that with the longer chains will be known as a more heavier crude, and with fewer of the carbon atoms will be known as the lighter crude oil. So if you perhaps hear in the news, when they talk of the benchmark for the crude oil prices, they use Brent oil. The Brent crude oil is what's found in the North Sea, and it is almost that sweet spot crude oil in that it's got the lightness that is required, but it's also sweet in that it doesn't contain as much sulfur, and also it has light enough carbons in it. And the importance of that is in the next slide, where crude oil is almost useless in its natural form. It's just a very dark, thick, very viscous liquid. It flows very slow. You could turn your cup over and probably an hour could pass before any of it actually dripped out of it. So you cannot actually make any real use of it in that form, and therefore it must undergo a process, and that is known as refinery, which is also nothing more than boiling the crude oil. So you're heating it up, and you're taking off at various levels of the temperature. You're drawing off different components from it, and that's in essence what our refineries do. So you would have gas, which is known as bottled or refinery gas, not to be confused with natural gas, which would be coming directly from offshore installations. Naphtha is a product that can be turned into polymers, and polymers in turn are what makes our plastic bottles and other petrochemical products. Gasoline, which only boils off at around 120 degrees Celsius, between 70 and 120 degrees Celsius, is actually what we term petrol in South Africa. It's called gasoline in the US and other parts of the world. And its chain only really has 8 carbons. And the good thing with gasoline is that it is light, so it's good for motor vehicle cars because it vaporizes very quickly, and so it's used basically in a combustion engine kind of process. Then we get kerosene. Kerosene in South Africa is also known as paraffin, so you would have the paraffin oil used in the paraffin lamps. Then we get gas oil or diesel, as we know. The interesting thing with diesel is that initially, because it's a heavier output of the crude oil, so it's more of a carbon chain. It used to be used for the heavier industrial machines like trucks and your working cars. But over the years, there's been a market of getting motor vehicles built to be able to also take diesel. And the interesting thing with that is that changes almost the market a little bit, because your feedstock of the crude oil is determined by the market that will take off these products. So if you are, sorry, I keep turning so my voice goes off and on. If you're wanting more of a gasoline output out of your refinery, you need to then feed it with crude oil that is of a lighter, so you want a light crude oil to actually be your feedstock of your refinery. And if you are wanting a more of a heavier product, so the refineries are actually purpose built for the market in which obviously the end customer would be making use of the crude oil, which is why you get crude oils being blended, because you rarely find that pure crude oil that will give you the exact quantities or properties that you're looking for. And then just looking to the remainder of the products, you get lubricating oils. These are very sticky. They don't stick to the materials and they prevent rust. Heavy gas oil, also known as marine gas oil, used in ships and some industrial uses. And residual makes up, you get waxes, you get the tarmac that's used in our roads. That's all forming, that's really almost to the quality of a crude oil. It's thick, it's smoky, it's dark, and it's less viscous, and it's a very heavy outcome of the refinery process. Our next topic is upstream, midstream, and downstream. As I mentioned in the introduction, the basis of this at this stage is just to give the definition of what sits where. So I will start it off with a video as well, and then just give a brief description thereafter.
Oil and gas are generated from a source rock, organic matter buried in the depths of the earth. Once formed, they climb back towards the surface. On their way, cap rocks can impede their progress, and they accumulate in reservoir rocks. Here they constitute hydrocarbon fields, which can be identified by interpreting seismic data, a sort of echography. The data is obtained with the help of a seismic ship. To confirm the interpretations of seismic data, two types of drilling gear exist. Each is adapted to a range of depth of water down to more than 2,500 meters. The platform seen here is a semi-submersible which floats and retains its stabilized position by means of anchors fixed on the seabed. Platforms at sea are used not only for drilling but also for the production of hydrocarbons. This production consists of the separation of oil, gas and water before the oil and gas is taken by pipeline towards a mainland terminal. Where it's impossible or too expensive to link the field to the coast by a pipeline, an FPSO ship is used, floating production storage and offloading barge. On board, the hydrocarbons and the water are separated. The oil is stored prior to being loaded on tankers and the gas is re-injected into the reservoir rocks. Gas from a field is taken to land through an underground gasoduct to a processing plant. There, if the gas is to be transported by sea, it's converted into liquid, obtained by cooling it down to minus 163 degrees Celsius. When it arrives at the plant terminal, the liquid natural gas, LNG, is returned to its gaseous state in a regasification plant before being introduced into the local gasoduct network. The LNG is stored in tanks before regasification. The crude oil is transported in a petroleum tanker, the capacity of which can attain 200,000 tons. It's commonly called a supertanker. The terminals capable of receiving such giants are few and far between. The ships used to transport the crude oil produced on an FPSO ship are of a much smaller capacity. The crude oil, before being refined, is stored in the port in large capacity tanks. The natural gas is preserved in reservoirs, artificial or natural. It's ready to be injected by pumping into the gasoduct network for industrial and domestic use, or as fuel in power generating stations. As far as the crude oil goes, it's transported by oleoduct to the refinery. There it undergoes a number of transformations and blending. A variety of finished products are obtained: LPG, petrol, kerosene, diesel, or naphtha, which will be used as the basis for the composition of plastic products.
So, just in a very simplistic form to explain, upstream is what is involved with exploration and production. So it is all the activities that take place offshore with regards to drilling and basically the extraction of crude oil and natural gas. Midstream, however, gets a little bit muddled with the downstream processes. You find that more in countries such as South Africa, where we don't produce, for example, crude oil ourselves. So if in countries like in the Middle East or America, you would find that they have a very distinct midstream, which is actually the storing of the crude oil, the marketing, obviously, to the various refineries, and the transportation, not to be confused with the retail transportation, which is trucking of the finished products from the refinery, but the transportation of the crude oil or the natural gas to a facility that will be used for further processing. So that actually is the correct definition for midstream, but we mix it up a little bit in South Africa, and we sometimes then will interchangeably include refineries or gas processing plants, which are in essence downstream under midstream, as well as, but the distinction for sure for downstream is then the retail and distribution of these products that you find primarily from the refineries, which I've mentioned in the previous diagram. And to just go a little bit into more detail with that, so upstream is made of, these are kind of like the key players. I'm just giving examples to say you'll have rig owners. They own the actual equipment which is used to drill. They may also be the same companies who have the operating license, so these are the oil companies, or not. So you would have a Shell, a BP, or Petro SA has the licensing rights to extract from a field offshore, and they will hire someone's rig to do that operations, and they would get an oil services company, such as the one I worked for before, Schlumberger, to drill and maintain that well or the production, the life cycle of producing that particular reservoir. But again, there are specific players in these industries, and there's some who play across the entire spread of the upstream sector. Then we get, as I've just said, so between midstream and downstream, we've got the transportation, which is moving goods, in essence, from offshore to onshore facilities. And then you get the refining and processing. So I've just written here, but they're basically all going together. Crude oil refineries, we have the CalRef in Cape Town, which is owned by Chevron. So Chevron has the rights. It's their crude oil, and then obviously with Caltex are distributing the end products. In Durban, south of Durban, we have SAPREF. This is a joint refinery for both BP and Shell. Then we've also got the Gas in Mossel Bay, that's purely a gas processing plant, so their feedstock would then just be gas. And with regards to distribution and retail sale, we have petrol stations, so the actual selling of diesel, petrol in our petrol stations is termed as the distribution and retail sale. And then the petrochemical industries, which take off some of those products. It could also be for the road, so the construction industry for use of the tarmac. Subsea and topside. Again, same as with trying to define between what is upstream, midstream, and downstream. It's also good to understand that a lot of the equipment that we'll be getting into the zone is actually what is found in subsea as well. So the companies who do a lot of manufacturing, that's actually where all the real action takes place, is actually subsea. And then topside is what is visible above the water level. I will just start off again with just a short video. There's no text to it, but maybe you can just watch. That goes into, it almost like zooms into what we call a remote operated vehicle going down to show the structure down into the well or the subsea floor. So the low-hanging equipment, that's what we call the remotely operated vehicles, which are basically the eyes, hands, and feet. They are the human element below the water to tell the engineers on the rigs what is actually happening with the equipment at the bottom. And all that piping you see connected, it's flowing, it's transporting the crude oil, the gas, it's sending telecommunication lines to operating the various pieces of equipment found on the seafloor. And the size of something like that is huge. It could take up basically this whole front area where we're standing. So just where the chairs are ending to the back of this wall, these are massive, massive pieces of equipment found in the seabed. I like that slogan because the subsurface is the new surface. It is truly fascinating how much, when you look at the platform physically, never seen with our own eyes, you only can view via a control room or in such videos are made. So just to go into the definitions again, subsea is not a term only for the oil and gas industry. It, as self-explanatory, below sea level, so below water level. So it refers to the equipment, technology, anything employed in marine biology, undersea geology, as well, of course, as the offshore oil and gas industry, underwater mining, offshore wind power industries. This is all termed under subsea, so it's not a term only specific to oil and gas industry specifically. However, topside is the term that is used for the superstructure or the platform. So when we had the animation in the first video and I showed that this is the derrick and this is almost your main frame rig component with the drill bits, that is then what you call the superstructure, which is then raised above the water level. And that's where the automation takes place. So it's got the pumps, it's got the drilling that must go through. That's where the operations below are being controlled. So basically, from the top side, we control what happens at subsea level. However, in the Togasi Series 2, which is component of the offshore industry, I will go into more details with each of these various components, and especially with the remotely operated vehicles, which is what we saw with the lights, just to show the kind of capabilities that they now have. Because if you think about it, back in the days, in the first kind of wells were being drilled, it was 200 meters, 350 meters, I think, maximum of depth. So you could actually have commercial divers go to the bottom to investigate any kind of issues, if there needed to be any welding works done or any changing out of pieces of equipment, maybe because it's obviously still the marine life and sea and shore. You can have stuck onto your equipment, maybe a big fish came and knocked something out. So you would actually send human beings to the bottom of the sea floor or of the legs of the rig to do those inspections at various intervals. However, technology is moving further and further afield, so we're getting into what we call deeper. We're basically drilling into deeper waters. We're getting into your 1 kilometer to 1,000 meters. You're getting up to 6,000 meters that you're drilling. So we no longer can use your human capability to still maintain and service all these equipment at the bottom of the sea floor. So as a result, the evolution of the remotely operated vehicles has gone to such an extent that it's almost replacing a human being, in the sense that initially it was just cameras. You lowered them to have a visual, then you know, okay, this is what the issue is coming from. But now they have control. They have arms that lever out. They can pull out nuts and bolts. They can replace pumps. They can change out. So if you want to perhaps change a line that was initially going through with the gas line and you want to maybe send a different, like maybe a higher or low pressure line, they can literally be programmed to go in there, unclip, plug the holes, swap the cables, but of course the precision that is required for that is absolutely immense. And where it leads back to is manufacturing. So the manufacturing has to be precise because you're programming a machine to replace something that it doesn't know but is only guided by the specifications of how it is manufactured. So it gets very technical. But I also had found a very nice video to actually demonstrate that, which we'll go through in series 2 of the components of the offshore industry. This schematic is just to, again, highlight the various components that you can find. And I just wanted to draw everyone to your attention to, I don't know if some of you still remember the big catastrophe in the Gulf of Mexico back in 2008 with the BP oil spill. What happened with that was one of these components, actually on the subsea, which is, it's not in one of the labels there, but it's called a blowout preventer. Because in essence, when you drill, then, the drill bit goes through the water and then hits the surface of the seafloor and then starts drilling to below then the surface of the seabed. And like we mentioned, there's very high pressures and temperatures. So you almost are pricking into a ready to erupt liquid. And if the equipment that you are lowering doesn't have enough of the pressure, the mud doesn't have enough pressure of cooling or keeping it down, it can, in essence, blow out. So then what they build is what they call a blowout preventer. And what it's meant to do is that it would cut off the circulation and plug the hole. So if it would be programmed to a certain pressure, that would be the limit to which, okay, here's a problem, shut it off, shut off. It's almost like a safety valve if you know of how those function as well. And what happened in that incident in the BP is that blowout preventer hadn't gone for maintenance, or, well, the jury's still out, I don't want to be caught having said the wrong thing. However, the issue was around the fact that it hadn't been well serviced, so it didn't activate in the manner that it should have to actually plug the hole when it needed to. And this is also something that's quite key, and I like to mention in that we are dealing with those sort of health and safety hazards when we eventually have companies in the Saldanha Bay IDZ entrusting us to repair and maintain a piece of equipment that could potentially really harm, the marine life and thousands of lives. So it's very important that we do, really world-class kind of work with these equipment as they come into the zone. And in this schematic, what they often also do, which does save a lot of cost, is you would have a pipeline going directly from the field into the refinery. So you also find that in countries that are producing and have that set up. So it really is a massive network. You would be surprised that you're swimming in underneath, if you're in some parts of the world, is this whole network of piping going through to a refinery or to a processing plant. The oil and gas supply value chain. This topic we'll delve into in series 6, but for the context of doing an introduction of the overall series, I do just want to highlight that the supply value chain is very broad. It's really, there's so much, there's so many components, there's so many different players and that come into the supply chain of the oil and gas industry. And just to give it a context, this would be what, for example, the oil companies or the people who have the rights to extract or explore a field, they look at the assessing of the field, trying to acquire, explore, develop, and produce. And the timeline from assessment all the way through to about production can be anything up to 15 years. So it's not something that happens, just in a couple of years. And the tricky thing with that is you find, just like any market, you've got your suppliers who are supplying the crude oil. They're the people who are drilling it. They got the rights. They found, here we can make X amount of barrels of crude oil per day. It ultimately would feed into refineries in these markets, and that's our customer end. But the time frame from that, working out basically those economic, financial calculations to when you're actually going to sell it. If it's 15 years, you start having situations like how this year the price drops, and the people who get hit the hardest, of course, the industry that is upstream, because their entire planning, which, as you can see, all the production planning materials, was really hinged on how much they can sell this crude oil for. I did mention we will be sending the presentation to participants, but I just, so I won't go into very great detail with some of the slides like this one, but I did want to just highlight and have it in there. These are your typical industry players, and we just had categorized it with regards to you would need people in the logistics, the chemical oil fields, the rig repair, so people who specifically do those functions. You get the fabricators and the oil services providers. They all have some role to play, and in some instances, obviously, when a rig owner, maybe there's a problem, they may have to contact the company, like the oil company who has the rights to schedule, okay, this is when we have maintenance and repair. Then they would need to make sure they have the parts, so the logistics come into play. They need to make sure they have the people who do the repair work ready. So it really becomes a whole big network just to organize getting the work done with regards to the oil and gas services industry and repair and maintenance work. Just another slide also just showing again the petroleum companies who you may recognize some of those logos, PetroSA, BP, and these are the people who own, we call them the drilling fleet, so they own the rigs, so it's their rigs to maintain, and they also are quite the key players because they can also be the people who decide that they want to bring their rigs to Saldanha Bay IDZ for repair and maintenance work. And in this slide, if you just look through the central line, so you've got share your value chain, so you get exploration, and that's got mainly to do with the oil and drilling companies. Reports on viability of the drilling site is basically their output or their product or their guiding document of profitability of moving forward. Then you get production, which is your oil companies specifically. How much of the crude oil and natural gas can they actually be able to produce to feed into refining, to be able to have petroleum products. Then you get into the players being the oil companies and some of the marketing, who buy those products. And then the other one I just put in there, petrochemicals, is also to highlight that crude oil is not only for refineries, it's not only for the fuel, but you also have petrochemicals. You've got a massive offtake for the pharmaceutical industry as well as the polymers that are, as I mentioned, used in plastic products. That brings us to the end of our talk this morning. I again want to stress the importance of attending all these sessions because we really will be building on from one series to the next. Invitations would be going out from our marketing team, alerting you of the next series, but we have put in our diaries to make it once a month, every second Thursday. Just like this, in the morning, it seems to be the popular time slots I found. You can come in, have a listen, and, of course, hopefully learn something as well. And so in the next session, I'd like to share with you for the components of oil and gas industry. These are my images, which I took from the time I worked in the Gulf of Mexico. I worked there because how we would work also is different projects are in different seasons. Like you cannot do work in the North Sea during winter times because the sea is incredibly rough. So we would be assigned to projects more in the Gulf of Mexico or elsewhere. So these are kind of over the span of the years that I would be there. And I just thought that it just is nice because sometimes you may see them from the nice pretty pictures or something like that, just to see the real image and also to highlight that, I don't know how clear it is, thank you, that when you see the setup being like that, where it's multiple rigs or platforms, that's a producing well. It's never, when it's just one rig, it really is more of a test or primary well. But when you've got the whole setup and you've got, like for example, this is the ship that will be doing the supply, you've got, its operations, lighting, then it's actually a producing platform, and that can be there for quite a number of years as well until, of course, it runs dry, but then it keeps producing. So I will go into more details with that during the series 2. And just to say, also when you see this, maybe this in this angle, because obviously I was taking from my opposite side of the rig, it may not really show the magnitude or length of how far this stretches out. So I thought I'd bring you back to this image again to say, when you're just seeing that, or you're just seeing that, below is a whole web and network of intricate machinery that are actually doing the work that is producing the oil and gas and the crude the crude oil and the natural gas. Thank you very much. I hope that was informative. And for the sake of time, because I understand that we have business people and who do need to get back to their jobs, we have opted to rather let people ask the questions through. We're going to be posting a survey, and you can ask your questions on there, and how then I would address it is at least I can categorize it, and then that way the feedback helps a lot more people as well, and it's a little bit more meat around it than responding to individual questions. However, if you do have a burning question that you must ask before you leave today, I'm still available, and I will just hang around and you can come to me and ask me those questions. Thank you.
I hope you guys are inspired to attend all the other sessions and to develop from one point to the next. As Benedicta said, we definitely don't want to keep anyone long. My job now is only just to thank everyone for their contributions and for all of you for coming and for listening. Komar, the videographer, at short notice for helping. All the staff of the IDZ for contributing, the Protea Hotel obviously. So thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to see you again at the next session. Thank you.